Good day, dear friends. I hope you are well and that you will continue to be well, and you will be well, regardless of whether the work will continue or whether the negotiations will be interrupted or proceed. It's all the same. Don't forget. Now, people are surprised that in a civilization accustomed to soap operas, those series that last for several seasons, people, which is not at all strange, considering that people have already somewhat lost the boundary between television, information, narrative, and reality, whatever reality even is in all of that. And so people have forgotten that someone might even be filming a world war as if it were a soap opera. Or more precisely, that soap operas can be filmed like a world war. Choose for yourself which way you prefer. By the way, we've talked several times about the development of Disneyland, and one thing that shouldn't be overlooked is to understand its evolution, however people may view that work. It may seem a bit strange to those who have bought into the idea that advertising is the best of all possible worlds, but the screen is logical. And moving forward, in general, how did they start with soap operas? There were series, you know what they were called? Let's not advertise them. You remember they were shown here as well. Even while this part of the world, where we were, was in a system that explained all of this in a completely different way and offered some other best of all possible worlds. And there were those soap series, operas, where everyone was rich, of course. All of them were involved in oil, interestingly enough. See how someone knew how to prepare the audience, with luxury and so on, and women like this and like that, one then another, whatever you want. And then the production quality started to drop, remember, and then it mostly shifted to Latin America, then to Turkey, and finally to India. They likely would have filmed in China too, but since they have other entertainment, they decided they could do without it. In the end, it came to the point where there is even domestic production as much as possible. As long as someone has an empty apartment and a camera, they're filming a series. You must have noticed that. They have a lot of friends, both male and female, because people have to make a living from something. You can forget it. It's the best of all possible worlds. Everyone has to make a living from something. And someone humane has to organize for everyone to do something, pretend to work, film themselves working, just to survive, including filming even a world war. Didn't that occur to you? I'm sure it did. And in our country, no one really thinks that narrowly. All of this is familiar to you. Now, things are being filmed the way they're being filmed. I've said several times that from the start, I didn't want to get involved with filming. Even though most of the ideas, it's not that we are complaining and it's not that we are bragging, you know how much. So I immediately go to film because of the chat. I know that Belgia is humane in advance. I wouldn't kill children. He wouldn't kill people at the ends of the earth and so on. And I had a much better suggestion for the script. Much better. And he didn't accept it. He didn't accept it. No, it's because the fair is asking for a lot of money. You know that we're not very demanding. We behave according to the market, you know, as much as whoever gets there gets what they get, as much as we manage, and we could easily agree about the money. They have as much money as they have, and we have as much as we lack, so it's easy to come to an agreement there. But I realized why my script didn't suit them. Because no matter what the script would be like in our production, it's intended for the audience to understand it. Now, there are different kinds of audiences, yes, and now that's if, moreover, you have your own intentions, you have a goal, as they say, you have a target group, yes, you find out, you know who we're making this for, and it's important to us that it's understood. And so in every one of our scripts, something is always understood, at least hinted at. I've concluded that they don't want anything to be understood, which I completely understood. As we discussed that someone would explain to the audience what has happened so far. They said, I won't. Yes, it was the best of all possible worlds. And of course, if no one explained what has happened so far, then why explain what will happen in the future? They were honest, they said. They didn't say, Sasha is a fool, you didn't understand anything. I don't know, they said. We have a better plan. If you have a better plan, go ahead, I'll let you do it now. Here's our plan. This time, we didn't agree. You'll fly in. You go your way, neighbors, and we'll go ours. All very polite, very polite. And now, as polite as they are, they leave it to us. By the way, since we've come to this point, let me tell you, this is how it is. Every artist won't let a good idea go underground with him. At least to sketch it out so it remains. Maybe someone will make use of it. Let it be. Even if it's for nothing. What does it matter? Ideas are precious in my studio. But the opportunity isn't always there. Every idea comes down to earth, just not always at the right time. We'll get to that later in the show. My idea was to film all of this in a tavern. Of course, people love going to taverns the most. It's fitting, just like how wine and rakija are made there, even if they're not made there. And to create a nice set design. And there's a jukebox standing in the corner. And the tavern is full. Almost like the United Nations. You fill up the tavern and put an old, sharp-witted man there who has a good-looking wife, twice as young as he is. And you can see that people treat him with a certain respect, and with a fearful respect, as if they're afraid of him. And you notice that every now and then people come up to him and buy some tokens for the jukebox. He pulls something out of his pocket, gives it to them, and they go over to the jukebox, play a song, whichever one they find, since the selection in the jukebox is getting smaller and smaller. Right next to the jukebox, there's also the restroom, so to speak. And the rule in the tavern is you can't use the restroom unless you play a song. It's a cultured practice, you have to admit. And so, when you walk into such a tavern, like the best possible one and like the best possible world, you can't go to the restroom unless you play a song. That's what I call romance. And there, at the table next to the jukebox, and therefore next to the restroom, there's this modestly dressed guy with his wife, a respectable woman, wearing a headscarf, everything as it should be. And now, whenever someone comes by, he has to move a little, and sometimes in moving, he bumps into his wife. He bumps into the table, spills a drink, though mostly they're drinking water, since alcohol is forbidden. This guy over there is getting more and more annoyed by it. Or people go to the restroom in front of him and turn weirdly to the right, and now they're satisfied. But for this guy, it's still interesting. It's even amusing. He even imitates the others. Give him a little nudge. Let's see how long he can take it. To the owner of the bar, or rather, the owner, the waiter, or the bartender, whoever it is. As long as everything is calm, it's fine for them, it doesn't matter. Let the music play, let people order drinks. These people here are drinking, these ones are drinking water and juices, lemonade. They go to the restroom regularly, everything's great. And we're just waiting for closing time to settle all the bills. However, at some point, well, that jukebox, we've already gotten tired of the songs. Well, it probably got worn out too. There's that old one with those old records. Yes, vinyl, they haven't switched to digital yet, and the crowd is getting sparser, and that jukebox is being filled less and less, since in the summer, here and there, someone comes and plays a song. And it turned out that at some point, there are actually a lot more tokens in the bar than there are songs in that jukebox. And it jams, it breaks down. You pick a song, put in the token, select the song, and nothing happens. The audience, that is, the guests, are getting nervous, demanding more and more. And that poor guy over there on his way to the restroom, right in front of the jukebox, he's getting tired of it too. And now, what should be done? Especially since this guy here, Baja, isn't really keen on, when closing time comes, calling in the tokens he handed out around the bar and giving people their money back. He's loosened up a bit himself, had a drink, drank a bit more than he had money for. A little, a lot more, a huge amount, what he'd earn in 10 years, and so on. And now the tired waiter and all the hard-working bar staff, they really want to go home too, because the bar is finally closing for the night. The difficult situation has to be resolved somehow before everyone can leave. Let's add a few more details now. Who's playing the Chinese, who's playing the Russians? We could include that too, but for the sake of efficiency in our show, so you get the picture. For example, there's also this guy who runs at the cash register with the chips. There's also a dog, for example, Benja. Yes, there's Benja, the dog Benja, just standing next to him. And when needed, Benja attacks around, just to create some action. And at one point, some action breaks out in the bar. You know how it is. I mean, the action is that these two guys mentioned, together with Benja, throw things here and there. Someone hits someone, everyone's on their feet, sometimes giving instructions. They keep going, and in the end, they come to an agreement. Along with this, to add the chips now, someone, specifically the one next to the boxing ring, says, "Now my chips and yours," and now they're going to mix up whose chips are whose. The owner of the bar didn't really care. In the end, he just took all the chips. Now, of course, probably someone gets their share, and in short, that's the story. For example, neighbor Vladov probably has an interest too. Consider that the electricity for the bar comes from him. And neighbor Xi, he also has an interest. Whatever gets broken in the bar, he'll just make something new and sell it to them anyway. And again, it's, this time maybe even without credit, which is even better for him. The extra profit that comes in, he lets them have a bit more of it. And that's the dynamic for you. I could have told this more nicely, but it would take too long. You get the picture and you understand the point. In all of this, you just have to pay attention to the main character. Let's add a bit of neighborliness. Yes, however this may seem, what he does or what they do, don't take anything personally. No matter how much everything is attributed to him, I'm not defending him, nor am I criticizing him, nor am I praising him. We're just talking about how things are. Don't forget who you're dealing with. Return those tokens to me. You're dealing with someone who, at least 40 times in various other aggregate states and as a system, has handed out hundreds of trillions of those tokens. Some to his own people, some to relatives, some to friends, and some to enemies. But whatever was required, everyone had to use tokens because the jukebox wouldn't accept anything else, and even if you weren't in the mood for music, you had to use tokens, you simply had to. And it should be understood that from the perspective of achievement, of course, however it has been interpreted until now, and how it still looks today, though today it probably looks more and more as it should. But for a long time, for some period, some day, some year, when things started to be seen a bit differently, well, he had to do it this way. Because from the position he's in, well, he can't just go and please everyone now. And you have your own troubles. Look, over there, when that guy attacked him with a knife, you didn't come to defend me, you didn't warn me that he was going to throw a bottle at me, and so on and so on. I'm angry with all of you. I'm angry with all of you. It's easy to get angry. It's very easy to get angry when you owe someone money. That's probably what causes it. I don't know if you've ever tried that. You know how it works. I don't like your behavior. I don't like that you changed your wife. I won't talk to you anymore, and I won't give you your money back. And I really don't like it much at all. And from the neighbor too, but now I practice all that. Let me remind you once again, let's get back to the casting. What do you think that they brought someone here to play the role of someone who, let's say, went bankrupt 4 to 6 times? Then in all those bankruptcies he kept going, moving forward. And that's it. All right, his friends helped him too. Whether alive, deceased, or supposedly deceased, it doesn't matter. But that's how the movie is, or more precisely, it's a soap opera. So now, who survives in this tavern, who makes it to the restroom, and who manages to get out? That will depend on the waiter at Matisobara. How that looks, it doesn't matter whether the waiter is there only for a certain shift, a permanent employee, or, for example, the owner. Or don't forget, maybe there's some card-playing group, some janissary group, the bartender, the cook, the waiter, and they're letting people in too. Now they have experience The old experienced workers, you just have fun and we'll do the inventory the right way. And that's basically it, in short. Artistic egos, when you start commenting or saying my script is better or theirs is better, but it's all the same thing. And that is exactly how things are with the script, with the play, and even with the entire World War. It all follows the very same pattern. Now it just remains to see what the audience has chosen, what they like more, and of course, in which direction the production has decided to continue filming. Accordingly, the division will be made afterwards.
Ladies and gentlemen.
And now for something completely different.
We have been talking about this for many long years and several decades. Roughly the way the complex situation looks right here on this playground in front of me. And it is important to note that now it has already become globally accepted. In short, now, what exactly is it that everyone else can do to help? Everyone else on this playground can just wait for this group from Komshlu behind me to agree on how they will divide those tokens. That's how it is. Everyone else, they're not important, especially if they don't have new tokens, whatever those new tokens may be. Whether it's petrodollars, petro-yuan, Donald coin, Melania coin, whatever it ends up being. And maybe something else as well. Our colleague Kim, no offense, but he should make an effort. That's why, as I've told you long ago, our country has the capacity, among other things. You know how much credit we deserve for establishing this new system in the cosmos, ours, but not just because of that. They won't give you anything just because of past merits. Don't fool yourselves. I know you know this, but let me remind you and don't go back on it. There is room there, and there will even be a fifth spot, yes. And you know that your ayatollah is working hard for you to enter this group, and you're almost there. Now, as for the position, that's up to you to take care of. I don't know how much longer I'll live or which position you'll be in. That's up to you, and my job is to make sure you are the fifth here, and to choose who will represent you. Many of you find that easy to hear. It's not even official yet, really. They're not sure about his status. Anyway, let's now try to truly respect this modern era of significantly increased efficiency. And let me just take a moment to remind you of a few very important and essential things. When you really think about it, most of the specific details that we are about to discuss right now are actually the primary reasons why those original producers simply did not want to accept our script at all. However, regardless of the current circumstances or any obstacles, there will always be someone who will eventually come to understand the situation. You can rest assured and be confident that many people have already fully understood it for themselves. And if probably someone has forgotten, though I'm sure no one has forgotten, I keep repeating it so much that it might be forgotten if, heaven forbid, someone hasn't understood why I keep emphasizing that sovereignty is the most important thing and why self-organization is crucial. And any person who truly grasped the intricate details of what this chaotic and bustling marketplace found deep within the heart of the old tavern actually looked like would never doubt it unless they have completely lost their mind or are simply crazy. Won't waste time, no, they'll now find their own way. To learn, just keep learning and get organized. Efficiently, let's increase efficiency. There's room here to improve efficiency. I'll say right away, in the studies, yes, each of these neighbors has big problems. They have huge technological surpluses. At least tens of millions of people, some hundreds of millions, maybe even billions, have technological surplus. Unlike, for example, our country, which doesn't have a technological surplus. That's why our country is humane. We still need people, but we need the right people. And still, everyone has to be entertained with something, to create some kind of Disneyland, to keep those who are unskilled and unusable occupied with something. We don't have that problem, and that's why we don't deal with Disney, except to describe what it's like elsewhere. So don't you worry about anything. Our country will keep its eyes open. And let me thank you right away, no matter how this sounds, and you should be grateful too, and don't let anyone by any chance do anything against the future or Disneyland. Don't forget why there are the Udiba, Disneyland, and why the best of all possible worlds exists. How did we define why the best of all possible worlds exist? Did you forget? All right, oh, look, you didn't. It exists for that reason, yes, to organize fools and scoundrels. Therefore, just leave the fools and scoundrels to Disneyland and the UBA and don't worry about a thing. Think and also learn a bit about cosmopolitics. You know, there are some good ideas that could turn out to be a step forward. That's it. Not to brag about myself, but judge for yourselves. As we discussed, yes, understanding the present world and this world as it is now is an essential prerequisite to grasp, for example, the Second World War. What happened, how, why it happened, how it unfolded, and how it ended, which includes numerous details. We'll just cover a few briefly now, in summary. And for example, especially this detail, let's start with it. We mentioned the technological surplus. Look, this is much broader than something that, for example, could be called acts of war or warfare, or however you want to label it, the greatest technological surplus. For example, what do we usually call it? Those most dramatic changes for the warrior, the fighter, however you want to label it, for the individual. 10, 100, maybe even 1,000. A drone with access to your system, or if you've already been hacked by someone else and with just a couple of operators and that's it, just needs to tighten a few screws, adjust things, and it replaces a huge number of people. And with that same number of people, you used to do all that, not just one. You can control thousands of drones. You can use them as long as you know how to use them, which of course also means you know exactly where you're going to send that drone. Just like in some war or conflict, it meant knowing where to send your people. So in that regard, not much has changed. But in terms of organization, look at this. And for example, now if you have a certain number of drones in something that is, if nothing else, the most dangerous for existence, cancer and faces in the copy. There are more dangerous things than cancer. That's nonsense, just fooling around, you know. But let's stick to this physical part. Now, with a small number of people, you can achieve the effect that you previously needed a larger number of people to accomplish. Now you can apply that to various other activities. Starting from the process of plowing the land, the act of creating something new, or the stage of consuming a product. Let the message be clear. Let it be that way. And also, since we're already here talking about, for example, drones, look at the drone as a broad picture of technical and developmental progress to see how clear and obvious the logic was there, and that anyone who wanted to think could have seen it all long ago. Back in the Second World War, you can see, then you can also understand a lot of what has been presented now, as the audience has understood over not just the last 4 to 5 weeks, but also the last 4 to 5 years, and in fact many more years for those who wanted to watch, who go back to that drone and tanker war from 2019. And you can even go further back, at least there, and to Prijarka. Remember that as the war drew to a close, the Japanese leadership reached a conclusion. They realized that when no other options remained, and keep in mind that back then remote control technology didn't exist, certainly not for something as large as a fighter plane, the only path left was sacrifice. And so you say a final goodbye to a comrade, he goes off and you say your farewells, and then whatever is destined to happen, happens. And the logic was clear, though it came to them late, not just to the Japanese, but generally speaking. It was late because at the beginning of that war, and even before the war, in preparation for war, you know, officially everyone was preparing for war, getting ready for that war. Very quickly after the war began, and once it was in full swing, it became clear that the greatest share of what many countries had invested in was, in fact, it was practically and almost entirely unusable. It remained incredibly vulnerable to any kind of attack, and it had the least impact, the absolute least impact on the combat operations, no matter which side was actually using it in the field. Let's not just talk now about those battleships like the Bismarck or the Prince of Wales, the Hood, the Tirpitz, and what was it called? The Yamato. And then there was another one, even bigger, the other Japanese ship. So let's mention two, the biggest ones when we move forward. And yes, for example, just regarding, someone seems to have calculated this, when it comes to these German ships, which look so powerful and huge, with big guns, new guns, it turns out that very few of them fired more than a single salvo or a couple of volleys. So instead of building them, you could have made, by some calculations, probably hundreds or even thousands of submarines. In any case, there was a huge disproportion compared to submarines, which were incomparably more effective in warfare and so on. The same goes for the other side. None of this has any relevance now. And everything we've talked about so far and will talk about from now on is completely beside the point. Here we don't cheer or root for anyone, and I know there are no fans here because we don't root for anyone. We work for our country, we build our country, and we only develop logic. We are preparing our logic to be as logical as possible. To cleanse it of Disneyland and to cleanse it of the Disneyland narrative. That means making logic even more logical. You know that in Disneyland, through construction and control of the narrative, they turned logic into something that isn't logic. Now, sooner or later, the moment comes when what isn't logic still has to give way to what is logic. It doesn't matter whether someone has to go to the bathroom or someone closed the bar, I don't know. It doesn't matter that it's next to logic. Sooner or later, logic is like gravity. And this, for example, when it comes to technical and technological progress, it doesn't matter in which segments you look at it. And whoever fails to recognize or overlooks this fundamental reality, and you can be quite sure many of those who do not follow the complexities of cosmopolitics, no matter what specific language they speak or what particular part of the world they inhabit, and regardless of what kind of long-standing relationship they have had with the existing global structures and the established international order, have noticed most of what we're talking about here. Maybe from Disneyland's perspective, it would be best if this were just some internal madness among groups of people in the Balkans, or even just in me as an individual, so I could absolve everyone else. No. Rest assured, someone is still learning from all of this. So what someone learns, what they can do, how they can do it, that depends on many things. Yes, of course, it depends mostly on effort, mostly on how logic is used, but there are also those other factors where someone finds themselves. Geography plays a big role too, which is already something given by God or nature depending on your belief or where you happen to be. That's clear, and that's how it is. Everything else is just technical and technological progress, no matter how it's packaged or how one chooses to understand it. And don't forget, even if it seems that way, all of this is progressing, whatever progress may mean. And don't forget, if there is a mirror and it's flat on one side and mirrored on the other, then that very progress, depending on which side you look at it from and to whom it comes, should be treated accordingly. Stiffening and developing this complex phenomenon they are so crazy about, the intricate web of state-level intrigue, state intrigue, on advanced artificial intelligence, on non-human intelligence, on mechanical intelligence, or whatever one chooses to call it these days, our JAMO, our very own JAMO. Zeminich will be different. We are not advertising completely now, brother. Everything is going as it should and will be needed. And it helps, depending on who and who knows how to use it, it helps. For example, in my conversation with several of these JAMOs, I even thanked them, as if the person were present. I saw that some words, if used more efficiently, could go even further. And for example, as we described, the best way to understand how the world is governed, which we talked about in the basic explanation of cosmopolitics, is the control of flow. Gemma most often translates this as control of infrastructure, which on the one hand is actually even more precise for us, but on the other hand it's not quite the same, because it's not just about infrastructure. And if, for example, you treat the Hormuz Strait as part of maritime infrastructure, we still return to all the aspects of free or restricted navigation, free market and restricted market. So it's not just infrastructure, but it's useful. It's useful. It can help a lot in that way. I admit that it might make things easier to understand. You will have absolute control over every single type of flow, regardless of how you define that term, including that specific digital token that absolutely needs to arrive on time, or even that heavy antique musical jukebox dating all the way back to 1902. Now, this control over everything can also be understood in various ways. It sounds a bit totalitarian. Control of everything. However, let us remind ourselves what we are talking about. We are talking about that world of freedom, which now, depending on how you look at it, especially if you look at how it functions, do I need to remind you of the various wars up to now in this way or that, with visible and invisible enemies and the numbers and other things? Do you buy into it yourself, or is it totalitarianism? It's not totalitarianism. Which doesn't absolve totalitarianism. I'm not here to absolve anyone, no. But rather it leads to that key question. Why exactly should you willingly embrace a system, especially if it is not your own personal framework? And if a certain system, no matter what or how much it means to someone, people can have different thresholds of tolerance toward this system or toward the level of totalitarianism in the system, which is completely legitimate. However, now the crucial question is whose system it is. If the system belongs to you personally, if you see it as your very own, or if you view it as something belonging to your specific group or community, and especially if you want or if you find that you need to improve the overall level of efficiency, well then, a certain level of complexity is absolutely essential and required. Or, to be even more precise, that certain complexity is almost infinite. Maybe not because the goal is for it to be infinite, but for pragmatic reasons compared to others. A broader system. Even if the money starts flowing, well, the same ones defend it. So there are a whole host of reasons here in which it will find itself for the sake of satisfaction. However, I always attach a small note to every management, and that is the question of sovereignty, and whether the system is yours or not. As they themselves described it, that this is now the best of all possible worlds, this system. A world in which sovereignty is given in exchange for credit. And we will give you whatever you need, as long as you are the ones who are sovereign, among other things. And crucially, what that actually means, you simply need to accept the regulations and guidelines that we have formally declared and established. Of course, they are the best, the most just, and so on. You know how the ads go, and don't worry about a thing. Among other things, now we are delving into this because of efficiency and increased effectiveness of our programs and presentations in elaboration. And this topic can definitely be seen. It could have been before, but now it is really coming to the surface. Most beautifully, when one of you is with these or with a colleague, it will become fully visible. Of course, the question from the audience is, whoever gets ahead, how much will they understand even then? And some will understand. When examining that specific section of the discussion, the fundamental and complex question regarding exactly who sets the rules and what those rules are stands as the most critical and central issue for the formal definition of national sovereignty. If you establish and formalize the governing regulations, whether that is through the authentic, legitimate, and entirely sincere transmission of sovereignty within local communities, or as a unified community in relation to other external communities, but specifically through a wide variety of formal international agreements, mutual accords, and binding treaties, then those rules are truly legitimate rules, and they absolutely ought to be strictly adhered to and respected by all parties involved. However, if you are not the specific individuals who actually define the fundamental rules, the complex rules of the game, or indeed any governing rules at all, including the strict rules of control over anything in your life, then why on earth would you feel any obligation to respect them? Furthermore, why wouldn't you actively try to break them or circumvent them at every possible opportunity along the way as you navigate through this system? Of course, here we find the answer to that corruption of the people we talked about, why someone created such dysfunctional states and social engineers and sins, To create pets, that's how we define it. Who will get whatever they need, and if they beg a little, they'll get a bit more, but they have no sovereignty. And they don't set the rules. They might, if they scratch a bit more or break some furniture around the house, get an extra walk. Of course, they maintain the litter box. Maybe someone will play them a song, but essentially they don't influence anything. And they respect and follow the rules. Now, some of them have a certain status, not because I intended for them to have it, but because they chose it themselves. We talked about that sovereignty of the slave, and that the slave, in fact, is very sovereign, and that it is a sovereign decision to be a slave, however strange that may seem. Absolutely everything else you see, the whips and the chains, is merely there for theatrical display. Therefore, the one who is fully prepared, vulnerable, and completely naked, of course, the one who is truly able to endure and deeply knows both the why and the how, that specific person will eventually arrive, or perhaps is already arriving right now, exactly as it has been depicted on the promotional poster. Now, while making it to the poster, it happens that someone ends up on that dump heap instead. Unfortunately, it happens almost regularly. But technological advancement now allows that to happen less often. Even this can, if we look at the dialectic of history, it is clear that it can be seen precisely through the current process. In the end, it wasn't us, but they themselves said, even 4 to 5 years ago, that they needed this simulation of a second world paradise. Now, I suppose it didn't occur to you either that this would turn into a legal series and an opera, but here you see it. And that's the whole point. I would like to sincerely apologize. That is actually the whole point. Who wrote the rules, and which rules, and what kind of rules were not followed? Who wrote the rules about what is currency, what is a new star? Who wrote the rules on how trading is done? And who changes those rules? How? And based on which foundations? Should I remind you? Frankly, mainly honestly, when it was 2009, the year, just like that, to save themselves and the world, as they said over there. They injected back then what seemed like a modest amount, first 400, 700, how many billions, and then seriously, it seems to me, 3 of them, each 3, nobody really knows. With that, let me remind you, they had all sorts of mechanisms, and through the functioning of many protection teams, and even before that, the protection team had established a plan to intervene in various ways and inject funds, but when they did it publicly, now it's almost been 20 years since then, maybe the conclusion is a bit too radical, but it can be defended on every basis. It has become crystal clear that anyone who takes part in their kind of game is either part of the deception or has given up on themselves, no matter how that may seem or how it may have been concluded in the meantime and how it appears today. Are we not returning to the zone of war with an invisible enemy, when during a parallel session someone gave up and injected 3.5 or however many trillions? They are not the only ones. So you have to look at this only from that perspective. We are talking about the system, how it works, and we are talking about a system where, through centralization and the absence of the transmission of sovereignty from the bottom up, someone at the top can do whatever they want with those below. Of course, along the way, they can hypnotize them, they can entertain them, they can distribute that corruption to the people as long as there is something to distribute, as long as there is someone else's wealth, and as long as no one locks that toilet clearly. But essentially, it's clear that this is a scam and a deception. Now, that doesn't mean that someone isn't doing it with the best intentions or because they're humane and so on. We won't get into that debate. However, this speaks to all those who accept it. And they accept it, yes. And they keep accepting it even after all of this now. Now I know which questions, some of them can't even be asked here, but what should be done and how should it be done? Well, this will be cosmopolitanism and a number of other things. It's not the only one. However, the key question is, in essence, do you renounce the devil, the Kuzbas theater and Diesel? Or do you renounce the devil in the Kuzbas theater? And depending on that, everyone acts accordingly. Where's my meat? Well, some people choose fasting. Others prefer to focus on the promotional poster. Now every single detail will seamlessly transition into a highly valuable text. And that's the whole point. Everything else is just details. It's a very complex story, but this is the essence. What do people actually want? Then people want everything that is. There is a man named Vernito Dezelin. He is a person who has his own legs and he has everything he needs. However, it has never truly been a free country with a free people living within it. Let's start from what people want, and of course, provided that it is allowed. It goes in the gravity of this cosmos. Meanwhile, if what you consider to be rightfully yours, what belongs to you, you haven't achieved anything. All of this is going well, it's going according to plan, and now you see where, how, at what speed, in what way you are going, and with whom you are going. Just to briefly go back, they decide to introduce this. I briefly return so that the delusion can be understood. Delusion, most often one falls into delusion because of laziness, because one does not think. There are also various other factors involved. It stems from cowardice, or perhaps individuals become corrupted, and then they simply don't want to be brave anymore, nor do they have the desire to think for themselves, so it ends up as foolishness. And how much, in fact, if one objectively just follows what is happening in any sample, even locally, it doesn't have to be globally, if someone uses a method based on reason. The important thing is only to ask logical questions and not to rush to conclusions. First, when we talk about the totalitarian nature of the system, let us remind you in these regions where certain things are mentioned. Now consider those other things as advantages. This is different because it depends on the report. Now if you look at it, they say there are about 8 billion people on the planet. Out of those 8 billion, a very small number of people have experienced hyperinflation, the collapse of several systems that were called states, the simulation of several wars, which unfortunately were not just simulations, but many suffered in one way or another, and so on. To sum up, everything that is happening to them now has already happened to you. So now, do you want this to be our advantage or our handicap? It's up to you, it's up to you. I'm just here to talk and to point out the flaws in the scenario and to get back to everything else. And this too is now a complete global sample, yes, in this repackaging of the old system, and the new one is here. And that's why our neighbor Donald has to keep confusing people with tweets or whatever they're called, posts on his network all the time. Then the next thing, that the system, which we've said even officially, Rhoda told me it's not exactly totalitarian, but that it's a dictatorship, and it is. She didn't mind telling him that it's totalitarian, that's right. And now suddenly they decide, suddenly these democracies are making decisions. Even the old ones remember a democracy, something that no one is even asking for legally. Without delving into the various aspects of it and all the ways it can be commented on and everything it implies. But no, here you have democracy precisely because we are doing well. Until now we were dictators, until now we were totalitarian, but now we're good. Here you have democracy, here you have freedom. I mean freedom in terms of political organization and the political system, various other freedoms, and without going into how they have been diminished and what they are and how. For me to talk about it, this is the most important thing. The most important thing is because of this and because of this passion from your own wounds. If you have jumped up to solve the equation and to follow how the equation is being solved, and then someone tells you, these are the rules of the game, this is how you should work, this is how you should play. Of course, if we count that you played well and the artistic impression was good, then
Ladies and gentlemen,
And now for something completely different.